it is interesting how your kind of diverse political party made up of Tibetans and Uyghurs and Hong Kongers are now being accused of being racist, right, against the Chinese Australians. Is that what's happening?
We always get accused of this. And the media sometimes doesn't help my case, because when they run a story about me getting arrested, they go, anti-China activist Drew Pavlou gets arrested. I'm like, no, I'm not anti-China, and I've said it a million times. I've never been anti-China. I'm anti-CCP. The CCP and China are not one and the same. That is a propaganda, that's a propaganda tactic that's been propagated by the CCP for years, where they try and conflate the Chinese people and the party state. That is completely wrong. I mean, when you criticize Scott Morrison in the Australian political context, no one in Australia would ever consider it a racial attack on all Australians. And so, like for example, when I did the sign about saying F Xi Jinping, some of the pro-CCP supporters were like, wow, how would you feel, Drew, if someone went in Cyprus and put up a sign saying, F Drew Pavlou? And some of them were like, how would you feel, Drew, if someone came, someone went in Singapore and they went outside Australia House in Singapore and they put up a sign saying F Scott Morrison? I was like, man, all the Australians there would come out and buy you a beer. Like, no one cares. No one sees it as
They don't get it.
No one sees Scott Morrison as the embodiment of the Australian people. We have a democracy. Half of Australians disagree with him. And it's the same in the CC. It's the same in China. It's a one-party state, but there are still hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens who've never had a say politically. They don't agree with Xi Jinping. They don't agree with the brutal authoritarian tactics. I mean, look at Shanghai. Look at the unrest in Shanghai recently. Like, Chinese censors were trying to work overdrive on the internet to try and censor any criticism of the party, because millions of netizens across China were criticizing the party state's insane policies on COVID zero. So it's very clear there is dissent in China. There is no such thing as, it is just absolutely a lie that the Chinese dictatorship embodies the Chinese people. And so, unfortunately, we've been smeared for so long as anti-China. And it's very sad. A lot of progressives, and this is something I've never understood. And it's like, it constantly infuriates me. And it's so hard for me personally as well, because I actually started off sort of more progressive leaning, and I still probably lean overall in that direction. But the way other progressives just smear me and attack me, and they go, Drew's a white supremacist, Drew's a fascist, because I criticize the Chinese dictatorship. And it's like, I don't understand it. It's like, part of it, I think, is just Trump obviously was very strongly critical of the CCP. He came out very harshly against Xi Jinping, etc. And so it's almost like half of progressives overnight must be like, wow, if Trump opposes it, therefore it must be good. And it's like, can people think about more than one thing at once?
No.
No. Well,
so
unfortunately, I do have to say that whole phenomenon it actually predates Trump.
It predates Trump, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, but the interesting thing, you're bringing up the CCP's sort of fascist Han ethno-state. And the irony here is that so anyone who's Tibetan or Uyghur is obviously subjugated and treated unfairly because they're not Han Chinese, right? Like the Uyghurs put in concentration camps, Tibetans, similar type things. But yet they're considered, these territories are part of China, so these people are Chinese and they're expected to toe the line.
Well, I mean, I think this is also, in Western discourse, we have this problem where it seems like some people think that the only people who can be imperialist or colonialist are white people, essentially.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, Shelley, is that the Chinese Communist Party
they're obviously going out and acting pretty imperialist right now. Yeah.
I can't believe you said that, Shelley.
I know, I'm so racist against
racist.
Chinese people.
Man, my Uyghur and Tibetan friends in Australia, they just they can't understand this sort of mindset that a lot of white progressives take to things. They just don't understand it. They're like, but we've experienced colonialism, we've experienced imperialism. Why do you just pretend it doesn't exist? Why do you pretend we don't exist? They say this to me. One of my Uyghur friends, I was having a lunch with him, and he said this thing that seemed so simple at the time, but I still think about it. It was just shocking. He was like, I really loved it when I moved to Australia and I got my ID for the first time, because the first time I had an ID in my life that didn't list my racial background on my ID. And I was like, whoa.
Wow.
And I was like, what do you mean? In China, your ID just says Uyghur. It has your race on there. And I was like, and it's just like small things like that. Like, it's shocking to me. And yet, like, in some of these, echo chambers, bubbles, like, they just think, yeah, it's impossible for, racial colonialism, imperialism to exist outside of the West. And it's like, and then my Uyghur friend was like, oh yeah, when I came to Australia, it felt like such a load lifted off my shoulders. It was the first time I never had, my race listed on my government identification papers. And I just go, whoa, like, I didn't even know that's a thing. Like, it's so ignorant on the part of so many people. They don't even care about their stories. They don't even, some of them don't know Uyghurs and Tibetans exist. Others know that it's happening, but they just ignore it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, there's always this argument about, we should work with China. We can't, antagonize the situation. But really, at the end of the day, what always happens is the Chinese Communist Party makes democracies more authoritarian. And I think your case is the perfect example of that.
And exactly that thing you just mentioned, like, we've got that problem still here in Australia where even just yesterday it came out that some really high-profile independent candidates who look like they're going to be elected to the next parliament, they came out and they were saying stuff like, oh, the Australian government's so arrogant, they haven't extended an olive branch to China diplomatically, they've talked so stridently about China, they've destroyed the economic relationship. And I'm like, I sit back and I'm like, wow, okay. So Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton and, government officials in Australia, criticized the Chinese government very harshly. Let's consider this the alternate scenario. Let's consider they go out, they extend the olive branch. Apparently, they kowtow. They pretend that there are no crimes against humanity in China. Either way, my Uyghur and Tibetan friends, they're still going to have family members who are tortured and persecuted just simply because of their racial background, no matter what an Australian government official says. So, like those people who say the West is at fault for deteriorating tensions, Australian government has been so offensive in its dealings with China. It's like, no matter what the Australian government says, my Uyghur and Tibetan friends are still going to have family members who are political prisoners. I still have Uyghur friends whose mothers will be in concentration camps because they talk to me in Australia, no matter what the Australian government says. So no matter whether we adopt the kowtow, the diplomatic niceties, we respect all the arbitrary red lines set down by Beijing, regardless of whether or not we do that, the Chinese dictatorship is still going to be an imperialist, fascist ethno-state. And that's just the fundamental nature of the regime, no matter what we do in the West. It's not, they haven't adopted the characteristics of a Han supremacist dictatorship because Trump came out and he criticized, China's COVID policies. That's not something that happens overnight. Regardless of what we say in the West, regardless of what our governments say or do, that is the fundamental nature of the CCP regime in China. It's not going to change as a result of whether we engage more nicely with them or not.
So, I would say that in a way, engaging with them more nicely just emboldens them, if anything.
Yeah. Of course.
We need to cut them off.
Yeah. So your party, a lot of the people in your party are immigrants, Uyghur, Tibetan, Hong Kong. Why should Australians want to elect them?
Yeah, so this is the thing. If you want people who understand at a fundamental level the threat and the danger that we're dealing with when it comes to the CCP, when it comes to the CCP's dealings with our country, if you want to elect someone who understands just in their, like so deeply, it just in the very core, in the fabric of their being, if you want someone that understands what we're dealing with here when it comes to the CCP's imperialism, its threats to undermine our democracy, its attempts to bully us into submission, its attempts to turn us into a vassal state, then don't vote for the political establishment, the same old politicians who take money from China, who go out and say, oh, we've got to engage with them because they're our largest trade partner. No, vote for people who've actually risked everything. Vote for people who have experienced the brutal reality of the Chinese Communist Party. So you can vote for the same old politicians who will just keep on the status quo dealings with China. You can vote for the status quo with China, where every day our democracy is under more and more strain. We are just completely economically tied at the hip with a dictatorship that has, just in the past year, demanded that we shut down, the free press, shut down independent think tanks and university departments, etc. We can be economically tied at the hip with a dictatorship that wants to destroy our democracy, destroy our democratic way of life, turn us into a vassal state, or we need to approach our dealings with the CCP with clear eyes, no more of the old failed engagement policy where, oh, if only we just trade with them a bit more, they'll turn into a thriving liberal democracy. No, we have to have clear eyes when we engage with the dictatorship. And so you can vote for the status quo, or you can vote for Tibetans who have had parents and grandparents who were tortured by the Chinese Communist Party. You can vote for Uyghurs who have family members in the concentration camps. You can vote for Hong Kongers who fled into exile because their friends were tortured. You can vote for, me, for example, who almost lost my education, has been assaulted, arrested, attacked. My family were threatened because I criticized the CCP. We are people who understand just because of who we are at a fundamental level. I mean, Kyinzom, our Tibetan candidate, she can't wake up tomorrow and change her stance on China because she gets a big, bag of money dropped in a letterbox. She can't do that because in the very core of her being, she's a refugee from Tibet. Her homeland was destroyed. Her grandfather died as a political prisoner, tortured by the Chinese government for years upon years. She's not someone who's going to sell out. She's not someone who, will sell out our sovereignty, sell out our democratic values, enable the slow boa constrictor type strangulation of our democracy. This isn't going to happen when you vote for the Democratic Alliance.